old Radio 4 and Guardian fan myself, but that's because I'm an old-fashioned academic. But if I do watch it, I watch Channel 4 News. And, of course, Angela Rippon, who is very familiar to all of us for a very long time, and goodness knows how many things she has done in broadcast journalism here, the other side of the Atlantic, for the last, I shouldn't say
43 years.
But thank you very much. We're really privileged to have you both here, and now I'm going to say carry on while I get off the stage.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, Frances, thank you so much. After your words of praise, I think I might apply for a pay increase. Okay, just a few words to welcome Angela and Dorothy. There was a journalist called Raymond Snoddy who wrote a book called The Good, the Bad and the Unacceptable about the history of British journalism. It's very easy for academics and the public at large to focus on what's wrong with the media, dumbing down sensationalism, soundbite culture and all the rest. Well, we want tonight to focus on the good. In any case, we do it in many ways at the university. For instance, we organise these series of visiting speakers. And the underlying theory is that the people we invite are the kind of journalists which we feel provide good role models for our students. They're well-read, visiting professors, for instance. It's Yasmin Alibai-Brown of The Independent, Bridget Kendall of the BBC, Mike Jensen, media ethics campaigner, Philip Knightley, investigative reporter. These are very different, but which the kind of person we want to see our journalists in operation and learn from them. Well, today, appropriately, the subject is what is good journalism, and we've got some terrific journalists to talk about that. Just a few words. Angela Rippon became the BBC's first woman newsreader in 1976 and was awarded an OBE for her services to broadcasting in 2004. She recently presented a series of BBC One consumer affairs programmes entitled Rip Off Britain with Jenny Bond and Gloria Hunniford. And in fact, the last time Angela came, she spoke particularly about consumer journalism, and a terrific talk it was. She was a regular newsreader on Channel 4's The Big Breakfast. More recently, she's hosted a weekend news shows for ITV Live with Angela Rippon. She's written children's books, Keep Fit guides for older people, and a biography of Prince Anne's first husband, Mark Phillips. That's just a brief selection of her work. Dorothy Bryne has been, as Frances said, Channel 4's head of news and current affairs for 7 years. Channel 4 in January 1998 as commissioning editor, current affairs, to edit Dispatches, the award-winning programme. Under her stewardship, Dispatches and Unreported World have become massively influential and often controversial programmes. Dorothy herself is a winner of the Women in Film and Television News and Factual Award in 2002 for Best Woman in Factual Television. And in 2007, she was highly commended in the Broadcast Journalist of the Year category of the London Press Club Awards. Correct? Sort of. Okay, well that's enough from me. It's over to Angela, who's going to start the debate. Thank you.
So what is good journalism? Well, you'd think that there would probably be a very nice, simple, straightforward answer. Good journalism is a story well written and well told, in which the reader or listener or viewer is informed of the facts relating to a particular issue, and as a result is able to form an opinion based on that information. Certainly, in very simple terms, that's how I would sum it up. Simple, except that no, it is not that simple. You see, that might be my pared down and distilled answer to the question, but it's not necessarily going to be everybody's opinion, because it really does depend on who you ask and the news agenda that that individual is servicing. For example, if you were to ask the editor of a red-topped tabloid what is good journalism, he or she would most likely say anything that sells newspapers. The journalism that the Sun and the Star, and to a slightly lesser degree the Mirror, are interested in printing is all about increased circulation. Their idea of good journalism can all too often be a salacious story about a footballer cheating on his wife and sleeping with a prostitute, or the breakup of a soap star's latest relationship. They want sensational headlines, the result of teams of reporters trawling through the intimate details of their victims' lives. Now, the quality of the writing can sometimes be less important than the sensational content of the story. And, indeed, the fact that some of the facts might not be facts at all, but gossip, hearsay, and assumption is something they'll worry about when and if the victim decides to sue them for libel. Also, the commercially minded editor is not necessarily looking for Pulitzer Prize-winning prose. Their readers don't want complicated sentence construction, subclauses, and long words. They want simple, concise sound bites, and in print, that means stories that are quick and easy to read. Those editors know their readers, and they pitch their stories accordingly. Now, that does not stop them from covering serious news or running some outstanding mass appeal campaigns. The Sun and the Mirror, for instance, have always had a great track record in political editors, in sports writers, and in campaigning journalism, and as a result have won numerous journalism awards for categories like Scoop of the Year, Reporter, or Photographer of the Year. But the journalism that the Red Tops practice very successfully, as their circulation figures in the millions suggest, is obviously quite different from that of the broadsheets. And if we just take a look at the front pages of a couple of today's papers, I think that will tell you what I mean. The Daily Telegraph, yes, it is featuring something from Strictly Come Dancing, but its main story is cut now or pay later, say business leaders, relating to a letter which is on their letters page. A new war on cheap alcohol, that's a good Daily Mail front page, isn't it? Rooney, I want to quit, a sports story, making the front page of the Sun. And the Star reverting to type, Katie's sex plot is a winner. Those front headlines tell you everything about what individual newspapers see as good journalism. Now, for example, if you are a Daily Telegraph reader, then you want the more serious, measured delivery of their reporting team. You want the considered opinions of Matthew Dancona, Simon Heffer, and Janet Daly, and not the screaming rhetoric of the local pub as written by, for instance, Richard Littlejohn, and then translated into print. Now, it would be very easy to be able to fall into the trap of snobbery where newspapers are concerned. This is good because it's a broadsheet or an established paper like the Telegraph or the Times or the Guardian, whereas this is a lesser example of good journalism because it's a tabloid. But actually, no. As news outlets, they can all be seen as examples of good journalism when measured by the expectations and demands of their readers, and when they're measured by the stories that they break, the information they give to the public, and the response they provoke among their readers. Now, it happens in broadcasting too. I can remember many years ago being sent, when I was a reporter at Television News, being sent to cover a particularly unpleasant crash on the M1 in fog, where several people were killed. We came back with some very disturbing pictures. Derek Maud, who was the editor of the day on the BBC One 9 o'clock news, said to me, "Does it infringe private grief?" And I said, "Well, yes, it does." He said, "Good, we'll bloody have it." Now, that was a classic tabloid reaction from an old Fleet Street hack. But when the story was aired, it made a powerful argument against speeding in the fog and the dangers of speeding on motorways in general. So, was it good journalism? Well, by those standards, on the impact that it had, yes, it was. In a way, it's almost easier to say what is not good journalism. Now, for me, sloppy writing, not checking facts, putting a spin on a story that avoids the truth, and accentuates a political or personal agenda, and failing to give a sense of time, place, and atmosphere of an event. Those, to me, make for bad journalism. Let me give you a few examples. I'm going to take the Today programme on October the 4th. James Nockety was interviewing the chief executive of Barnardo's. He was talking about the cutting of child benefit that was going to happen later in the day. Earlier in the programme, at 6 a.m. in the morning, George Osborne, the Chancellor, had already said what he was going to do. There'd already been a statement saying exactly what he was going to be doing with child benefit. Nockety did his interview as if that statement had never been made. It was an excellent interview if taken in isolation, but when you realise that many of the questions that he was asking were based on the fact that he ignored completely, when talking to the chairman of Barnardo's, what Osborne had said he was doing, that for me was bad journalism. The Telegraph, brilliant journalism in exposing what was happening to the expenses of MPs in the House of Commons. However, dig a little bit deeper. Remember the famous Duck House? The Duck House, yes, it appeared on some of the expenses, but the Duck House was never actually accepted. The Duck House was never passed as an expense, and no money was ever paid for the Duck House. Therefore, it was a non-story. But it stole a headline. It had brilliant headlines. Everybody thinks about the Duck House now when they think about MPs fiddling their expenses, even though that particular MP was not paid a penny for it. The Daily Mail in 2002 ran a front-page story about HRT. It ran a huge story saying that latest research had shown that there was a double in the risk to women taking, a double in the percentage in the risk to women taking HRT for the possibility of being more likely to get cancer. It doubled the risk. The story went on to talk about a study using women who were in their 70s and their 80s, when the majority of those using HRT were in their 50s and who have usually given up before they reach that age of 70 or 80. Now, as a result of that story, millions of women came off HRT, even though it had untold benefits in other areas. It was not until you got to the very, very last paragraph on page 2, after you'd read the sensational headline on page 1, that this increase in the number of women had gone up from 1% to 2%. Not quite the story that had appeared originally, but proof that you cannot fool the public. I took a look at their website when that story was written, and I found this comment. Another misleading headline and article from the Daily Mail, always scaremongering and giving biased reports. So, that was a good story, but it was not good journalism because it skewed the facts to suit their preferred headline. Now, under Sir David English, the editor of the Mail, he clocked up some memorable campaigns, not the least was the one that he ran to get justice for the death of Stephen Lawrence. Here was good journalism, taking on a case that had national implications and demonstrated flaws in the legal system and the reluctance of certain sections of the public to trust the police. Their team of reporters did a brilliant job in turning the Lawrence death into a national cause célèbre and showed the newspaper at its campaigning best. Then, earlier this year, along came Jan Moyer with her report on the death of Stephen Gately. It was well written, so it could be judged, at first glance, as good journalism. But it turned out to be inaccurate in detail and was judged both insensitive and homophobic. It was not good journalism. The Daily Mirror has a long and distinguished history as a great campaigning newspaper. They were the very first newspaper in the 1930s to denounce Hitler. Its reporter, John Pilger, has sent outstanding and memorable reports back from Cambodia, exposing the atrocities of the Khmer Rouge. And then Piers Morgan, when editor, blew all of that with a collection of photographs of the Queen's Lancashire Regiment in Iraq, which turned out to be a hoax because he had not checked his sources or the veracity of the photographs. What started out as good journalism in all of those cases was destroyed by the simple act of being sloppy, not checking facts. When checking your facts as a journalist should be at the head of consideration before filing a story of any description. There is an old Fleet Street saying, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Wrong. That may be fine if you want to write for a nondescript comic, but the truth, the facts, should always be the foundation of every journalist's work, and those who forget that do themselves and their profession a great disservice. For me, the truth is always the yardstick of a good story and at the heart of good journalism. At the BBC, there's always been a rule not to air any story until there are at least 3 reliable sources to verify the facts. It's a good rule. At times, it's a very frustrating one. But I've worked in rolling newsrooms where images and stories are flashed up on the screen, and I've heard news anchors reporting the latest headlines with breathless excitement, only to find out an hour later that the story has been denied. Had they waited for confirmation, they would have been spared the embarrassment and not risked shocking the state's reputation for accuracy and trust. And that is an important word in journalism, trust. How often have you heard people say, you can't believe anything's written in the newspapers these days? And it's true. You can't. That is why in a national poll, journalists came out bottom, even behind MPs, of those people that the public believe they can trust. Now, it's all very well having flashy headlines and exclusive stories that leave every other newspaper floundering in your wake. But if you lose the trust of a news-hungry public, you have devalued the strength of good journalism and the honour of good journalists. Now, I'm sure this all sounds terribly old-fashioned, and I do accept that I do have very old-fashioned values when it comes to journalism of honesty, accuracy, and integrity in my work. So, let this old dinosaur bring you up to date. In this, the 21st century, we have a fascination with and an addiction to Twittering and blogging. And I see that as a real danger to good journalism and truth. It is just too easy to write anything in the public domain without censorship or responsibility, both of them classic homes of power without responsibility. For make no mistake about it, newspapers, radio and television, any media outlet, does have enormous power to influence, to inform, to be a rallying point for national opinion. They can destroy reputations, they can bring down governments or even elevate them. They can create heroes and stir the national conscience. Only when that power is wielded with responsibility and the main building blocks of good journalism is it truly effective. The Sun and their reporting of the Hillsborough disaster are classic examples of getting it oh so wrong. Now, it is said that truth is the first casualty of war. I believe that now, in the 21st century, accuracy is the first casualty of speed. I'm going to read you an account from the Times newspaper of 1854. It's a battle which took place in the Crimean War. And this is how it begins. At 11 a.m., our light cavalry brigade rushed to the front. The Russians opened up on them with guns from the redoubts to the right, with volleys of musketry and rifles. They swept proudly past, glittering in the morning sun, in all the pride and splendour of war. We could hardly believe the evidence of our senses. Surely that handful of men were not going to charge an army in position. Alas, it was but too true. Their desperate valour knew no bounds, and far indeed was it removed from its so-called better part, discretion. They advanced in 2 lines, quickening the pace as they closed towards the enemy. A more fearful spectacle was never witnessed than by those who, without the power to aid, beheld their heroic countrymen rushing into the arms of sudden death. At the distance of 1,200 yards, the whole line of the enemy belched forth from 30 iron mouths, a flood of smoke and flame through which hissed the deadly balls. Their flight was marked by instant gaps in our ranks, the dead men and horses, by steeds flying wounded or riderless across the plain. The first line was broken. It was joined by the second. They never halted or checked their speed an instant. With diminished ranks, thinned by those 30 guns, which the Russians had laid with the most deadly accuracy, with a halo of flashing steel above their heads, and with a cheer which was many a noble fellow's death cry, they flew into the smoke of the batteries. But ere they were lost from view, the plain was strewed with their bodies and with the carcasses of horses. They were exposed to an oblique fire from the batteries on the hills on both sides, as well as to a direct fire of musketry. Through the clouds of smoke we could see their sabres flashing as they rode up to the guns, and dashed between them, cutting down the gunners as they stood. The blaze of their steel, like an officer standing near me said, was like the turn of a shoal of mackerel. We saw them riding through the guns, as I have said. To our delight, we saw them returning after breaking through a column of Russian infantry and scattering them like chaff when the flank fire of the battery on the hill swept them down, scattered and broken as they were. Wounded men and dismounted troopers flying toward us told the sad tale. Demigods could not have done what they had failed to do. At the very moment when they were about to retreat, a regiment of lancers was hurled upon their flank. Colonel Schewel of the 8th Hussars saw the danger and rode his men straight at them, cutting his way through with fearful loss. The other regiments turned and engaged in a desperate encounter. With courage too great almost for credence, they were breaking their way through the columns which enveloped them, where they took place, an act of atrocity without parallel in modern warfare of civilized nations. The Russian gunners, when the storm of cavalry passed, returned to their guns. They saw their own cavalry mingled with the troopers who had just ridden over them, and to the eternal disgrace of the Russian name, the miscreants poured a murderous volley of grape and canister on the mass of struggling men and horses, mingling friend and foe in one common ruin. It was as much as our heavy cavalry brigade could do to cover the retreat of the miserable remnants of the band of heroes as they returned to the place they had so lately quitted in all the pride of life. At 11:35, not one British soldier, except the dead and dying, was left in front of those bloody Muscovite guns. Now that is not good journalism. That is great journalism. It gives the facts, it sets the scene, and through the reporter's skills and superb narrative, he takes the reader right into the heart of the battle. That was written by the first great war correspondent, William Howard Russell, reporting on the charge of the Light Brigade. It took 20 days for that report to go from the Crimea to reach London and be printed in the Times. Today, a blogger or a tweeter could do exactly the same in 20 seconds. Now, I do believe that standards in journalism are at risk from modern technology, and that bloggers and cyberspace jockeys are delusional if they believe that what they are writing is journalism. It is journalists in the mould of William Russell, those who've come after him, producing good journalism and sometimes great journalism, who are the standard bearers of excellence in the future, writing reports that leave an indelible impression and change our outlook on the world. In television, it's easy to single out Michael Burke for his reports from Ethiopia, Brian Hanrahan for his memorable report from the Falklands in which he counted them out and counted them in. Just about everything from the pen of John Simpson and the late, great Charles Wheeler. The American reporters who told the truth of what was happening in Vietnam at the My Lai massacre. And every newspaper journalist, national or local, that has picked up and run with a story of major national or local interest, worried at it like a dog with a bone, and not let go until they have achieved a resolution. They are all producing good journalism by sticking to the simple rules of a story honestly told, well written, without political or personal bias, which allows its reader to form an opinion. Beyond that, every day we have acres of newsprint and hours of news reporting that ranges from the good to the bad to the indifferent. But on the whole, the public are no longer fooled. They, all of you, are intelligent and informed. You can sort the reported wheat from the chaff, to see the journalism that shines through the dross, to make a real impression through its clarity, its honesty, and the quality of its content. And fortunately, there is still enough of it around to ensure that as consumers, we can all tell the difference, and that as students of journalism, we have excellent examples of what makes good journalism and how it should be done.
Angela, thank you so much. Very provocative, very controversial maybe, the talk about the threat to standards from blogging and Twittering. I should say to everyone, this is a historic moment for us. It's the first time we've been live streaming. So congratulations to the LSJ TV team. Excellent. Right, over to you now, Dorothy.
Well, thank you very much. I agreed with an enormous amount of what Angela said, and I think she laid down some of the basics of good journalism. So actually on the subject of good journalism I will say a bit more, but I think she said lots of things that are very good there. What I would say is that you showed how good a newspaper the Daily Telegraph is, because they had that big picture of Felicity Kendall, and we all know about Daily Telegraph male readers, they all fancy Felicity Kendall. I believe she's the most fancied woman in Britain or something like that. I should also say that the survey done of public trust in journalists was of newspaper journalists, and in fact the public trust in television journalists is very high. I've been in television for 28 years. I worked on World in Action for many years, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt that now than it used to be, because it has to be, because at every second we have barrages of lawyers and PR men setting out to attack us in ways that never occurred before. We've got a terrific programme on tonight, which I know you'll all have Sky Plus or videoed or whatever, on how the rich beat the taxman, and there's a lot in there about politicians and their tax affairs, and I can assure you we've been very, very busy with letters from lots of people in the past week, in a way that on World in Action would have been very rare. And now it is not unusual for us to have for a person to employ two firms of lawyers at once. I've never quite understood why they spent money on both. So I can honestly say that I have a very high level of confidence in the accuracy of television journalism. I also think that blogs are fantastic, and I would recommend Jon Snow's blog to you. I would recommend Faisal Islam's blog to you. I think it's a whole new way of us communicating with our audiences, and it's a fantastic way of them communicating back to us. And I think it opens up this wonderful conversation between the journalist and the member of the public, and makes it, it informs us, because they all know, you know, it must be that all the people of Britain between them know more than all the journalists in Britain between them, and therefore it must be a good idea for journalists to be in this direct contact with their audiences. And you know, I'm sure there are some rubbishy blogs, just as there are rubbishy forms of all journalism and always have been. But I think that blogs are just a new way of speaking to people. And of course they must be accurate. And, you know, there can never be any excuse for lack of accuracy. Now, so what would I add to what Angela has said about, you know, what makes a good journalist? Well, or good journalism. You know, I think you have to believe in journalism. And I would say don't even bother going into it if you don't believe in it, because you will almost certainly never be rich. You will always be a disappointment to your parents. If you enter TV now, there is a very high chance that you will not get a job at all. You will just get a series of contracts, and therefore you won't get any pension. And, you know, I absolutely urge young women to enter television journalism, but at the same time I have to say that, you know, I was a freelance when I got pregnant and I had to go back to work after 6 weeks. So you'd better be clear that if you're going to be a journalist, then, you know, do it because you really believe that it matters. And in fact, my daughter, who, hello there, you know, she's still alive now, although I had to leave her at 6 weeks. I didn't leave her alone, obviously. You know, she's suffered for journalism. I've suffered for journalism because I really believe in it. I really believe that we are the sources of, some of the sources of information in society which empowers people to do good. It is absolutely clear that you cannot have any form of democratic system without a free press and a free media. You know, if I look at dispatches tonight examining the financial affairs of politicians, that's exactly what we should be doing. In fact, we should probably have a whole TV channel that just does that. And if we think of what's going to happen over the next year, looking at how these cuts are going to affect life in Britain, of course, everybody out there who will be suffering from the cuts will be informed about how they are really affecting them. And it's for us as journalists to gather up that information, to re-inform the whole of society and say, were these cuts the right cuts? Did they go too far? Did they not go far enough? But, you know, this is absolutely essential work. So, you know, I believe that a good journalist is somebody who wants to give other people information. I think there is a role for people who want to give other people their opinion. That's quite interesting, but to me is not the essential thing of journalism, because the essential thing for me is that I allow you all to have your opinions. That doesn't mean that I don't have an agenda of things which I regard as very important. And you can reject my agenda or you can like my agenda. If you don't like my agenda, you can go to the BBC and be bored to death. You know, so I may have an agenda, but that should not affect the due impartiality. So, for example, I regard as key to the agenda of Channel 4 journalism that we should inform people about far-off lands that no one else cares anything about. And, you know, that's my agenda. It's absolutely clear. We have a programme called Unreported World. But within that programme, you know, what we are telling you is as true as we can make it. And people go on and on and on about truth. And I have a degree in philosophy and, you know, I can go on with the best of them. But, you know, what we're trying to do is strive for truth. I think the other thing that's very important is not just that we don't just bring our own perspective to stories, and inevitably you bring your own perspective to stories. I am a woman, I'm a single parent, I have a particular interest in stories about single parents. Apparently we're monsters and destroying society at all times. But I must also bring to you perspectives that you can't get. You live in Lincoln. I have the great benefit that I can send somebody to Iran and they can interview people in Iran about their perspective and bring that to you, because you wouldn't be able to get that perspective. And I think one of the best stories Channel 4 News ever did was when it went to Iran at the height of us all being terrified of Iran, and it asked all these young people in Iran, well, what do you think about everything? And they all went, oh my God, we're so terrified. And you thought, oh, so we're all terrified, and they're all terrified. Well, there's something interesting about that. I would say that we have got to be prepared to ask any question at all, and not to be afraid of the answer. You know, I might find that it is legitimate to ask, are single parents destroying society? And you know what? If the evidence is that they're destroying society, then I would have to accept that. Is it true that girls or people from some ethnic minorities are less intelligent than other people? Well, lots of people think that. Let's look at that and find out if that is true. So I don't think we should ever be afraid to ask any question, or to assume that we know the answer, or to shy away from an answer that might frighten us. And I think, you know, my criticism of a lot of journalism is that it's too mealy-mouthed. People don't ask the really difficult, the politically incorrect question, that there is too much of an assumption that there are answers that we all agree in. all agree on. And I think that that is a very serious issue in broadcast journalists. So finally, I would say that a good journalist is someone who realises that they don't know nearly as much as they think they know, but they have an overwhelming passion to go out and find out different answers from other people.
That was terrific, Dorothy. You probably gathered that Angela was concentrating on print and Dorothy is television as previously arranged. Okay, so now it's over to you, audience. We've got until 7:10, then Dorothy and Angela have to race to the railway station. So there's a good few minutes here. So the thing will be you'll have to have this machine.
Can you shout?
And give your name and your course, or if you're a member of the public.
Is that the only one you've got? Okay. Pass the parcel, isn't it?
Hi. My name is Leo Bazou. Can you hear me?
Your name is what?
Because I can't hear anything.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Go for
Okay. I'm a PhD student in journalism. I was wondering, you talked about good... this is a question to Angela in particular. When you were talking about good journalism, you mentioned a couple of factors. Sorry, you mentioned a couple of different factors, but I was wondering about, using an old-fashioned term, I'm an old-fashioned person too, the moral implications of journalism, or the ethical implications of journalism. Yeah. And I was just wondering, I'm just bringing up a totally absurd example, just for you to maybe allude a little bit on that. A program, a documentary on the best ways to commit suicide, cheap, painless, free, using household goods. Good journalism, yes or no? Or in which way could it be good journalism? Could it ever be good journalism? If it's accurate, if it's true, etc.
Is it good journalism? If it's what you're asking me was a program that went on television about euthanasia.
Not euthanasia. How to commit suicide.
How to commit suicide.
You're a bit miserable, and you always think it's a painful, messy affair. But you know what? Really, if you drink 3 glasses of water at midnight and do a little jiggle, you can die and have the most beautiful death ever. Is it good journalism? I mean, I'm just.
It was
trying
probably.
to be
Look at it within the context of what they did. If what they did was accurate and truthful and well produced and presented, it probably was good journalism. But as I've said in when I was talking to you, there are examples of good journalism which are, when they're examined more closely, turn out to have flaws. And I think that while if you took that programme, which I didn't see, but I...
No, it's just...
You're just making it up as you go along, right. A programme like that, providing it was accurate and well projected, could be seen as good journalism in isolation. But would it be seen as responsible journalism? That is another question entirely. And I think that there are ethics that, and Dorothy would know better than me on this, there are ethics. I mean, would you, for instance, Dorothy, put a programme like that on Unreported World or on Dispatches?
Assisting suicide
It's a crime.
So I wouldn't do that.
So you couldn't do it.
Want to go to jail.
So it would have moral implications in terms of being of a programme, but that doesn't mean to say that someone couldn't write an article about it which was well researched and probably extremely well written, which made it good journalism. Whether it would ever actually get into print or not would be debatable, simply because helping people to commit suicide is illegal.
We'll move on from there. Thank you. Next person.
Throw it down to the front. Do it quickly. Down here.
Yes.
You shout. Just shout. We can hear you while they pass the microphone down.
Do you think there's any place in journalism for subterfuge, like Michael Coulson's piece? I've got the mic now. It doesn't seem to be working.
Yes, it is actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. That's okay then. Is there any place in journalism for subterfuge, sting operations, or do you think it's deceit is deceit and should never have a place?
I don't know what Dorothy thinks about this, but it's a sort of step up from what we used to call checkbook journalism, when people used to turn up with a checkbook and offer to pay you lots of money if you would tell the kind of story about someone else that you wouldn't tell without the influence of money. I think there are certain situations where the stings are actually valid. You have one that today in the Times, I think, about the the men who are members of FIFA. Now, if you are able as a journalist to uncover something that is deceitful, something that is illegal or irregular, I personally have no problem with that, because I think you are doing your job as a reporter in reporting something that the public need to be aware of. Where I do have a problem is when you use that kind of sting to look into someone's very private life. And I do have a problem with that, because I do think that that is total invasion of privacy, and there are now laws to protect you against that. But the kind of thing that is going on at the moment, for instance, with the members of FIFA who allegedly are prepared to accept money to ensure that a particular country gets the world football, the World Cup in 2000 and whenever it is, I think that that is perfectly justified, because these are people who are breaking the law and they need to be exposed. And I think if the Times have done it and their story is correct, then they have probably done every nation that is involved in and interested in football a great service, and they've certainly made FIFA take a very closer look at their own act.
Well, we do a great deal of secret filming, but under our own rules and the Ofcom regulations, it has to be in the public interest. So I'm absolutely in favour of it, because there are many things that you will never be able to find out unless you're secretly filming. And some of the best programmes we've done, Undercover Hospital Food, watch that one, Undercover Nurse, Undercover Teacher, you know, these are programmes showing you the truth about public services. Or we could do Undercover University Lecturer, Undercover Professor.
That would be boring.
That is completely different to hacking into people's telephones, which is, again, not something I'd recommend, as it's a criminal offence. But I like the way you all keep thinking of committing criminal offences. It's quite interesting.
Okay, lots of people.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah, it's over here. There.
Well, we've got the microphone down here. We'll come over there. Right, okay. Quickly, because we're wasting time.
On the BA Investigative Journalism and Research course. So a question for both Dorothy and Angela. How important is it to conduct good research, not only to gain a great top line, but also to act as a public watchdog as best as possible?
Well, obviously that's important.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
It's vital.
I think we're agreed on that.
It's absolutely vital, Tom. If you don't do your research, then you're not going to know the facts, and you're not going to be able to present a story as fully as you would be able to if you just scratch the surface of something. Because if you don't get your facts right, someone is going to come along and say that is not correct, and you are going to be the one who is in trouble. And so is your broadcasting organisation. We'll go to the lady that was over there.
Let's move, towards here. Was there someone here? We can move the microphone across. There's a chat there.
My name is Urs Eltert, and I'm a postgraduate journalist.
If you speak to the mic.
Yes. I was wondering, both of you are in leading positions, but the majority of leading journalists are still male. Does that lead to a biased journalism?
Okay.
Are the majority of leading journalists still male? Well,
certainly in print.
I mean, I think it's a very interesting thing what happens. A lot of women just fall by the wayside because they find the life too difficult. And of course, whenever you have a group in society underrepresented, then you can't get really good journalism. And I think the two areas actually where that worries me most is the lack of leading Muslim journalists and the lack of male Afro-Caribbean journalists. There are far too few of them to really represent and think up story ideas. You inevitably think up story ideas about, things which you know yourself. Underrepresentation of any group is a problem.
I think your question was specifically about women being underrepresented, and I totally agree with Dorothy. We do have some ethnic minorities that are underrepresented. But I think that if you actually examine what is happening in the world of television and radio in particular, I can't speak for newspapers, because I have a feeling that women have always actually had quite an important role in newspapers. They might tended to have been put on the women's page and things like that, but in the media, in in radio and television. Just think of the women we now have who are sports journalists, our political correspondents who are women, our financial correspondents who are women. You go into any of the major newsrooms for the BBC and ITV and you will find predominantly that there are, or a very, very large proportion of them are women producers, line editors. You are getting more and more women coming into, if you like, those areas that were seen previously predominantly being held by men. More and more women are coming in. But I've always said this is not just an ethnic question, this is a mathematical question. You have probably fewer women who are able to continue their careers, because as Dorothy says, you have to take a break perhaps for having children or whatever. And also this argument about there not being more mature women in television. There were never very many women when I started in television. There were only a handful of us. There were about a dozen of us 30, 40 years ago. But the dozen of us that were around 30 or 40 years ago are still around now. But if you look at the young women that are on television now, in their 30s and their 40s, they are coming through the system, and you are finding every year you get more and more women newsreaders, women political correspondents, women in positions of authority and responsibility in the broadcast media. And I rather hope that in a few years' time this is not actually going to be a question, because there will be so many very good journalists who are accepted on their own merits for the quality of the work that they produce. We'll stop worrying about whether they're men or women and just say that what they represent is the British public and the views of the British public, and they are doing a really good job, and their sex or their ethnic origins are actually immaterial. That's what I would like to see anyway.
Thank you. Yes. Here.
I'm Layla, I'm a third year journalism. I was just wondering, I'm doing my dissertation on has the continuous reporting of child stars affected them in their career? So, for example, Michael Jackson, Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan. I was wondering how you feel on that, whether you feel that is a main factor that has initially made them go crazy.
Your question is being child stars and having all of that
reporting,
all of that stuff thrown at them when they were young. Has it damaged them in later life?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, but I would always look at their families as well.
There are some child stars who've gone on to be very... I mean, I'm just thinking of Shirley Temple, who went on to become an ambassador for the United States. It didn't do her any harm, but I think it depends on the individual. And as Dorothy says, look at the families. Look at Michael Jackson's family before you start looking at Michael Jackson, I think.
Yeah. Dangerous to generalise. Yes, over there, the woman sitting down in the aisle.
Rachel Harris, level 1 journalism student. This is more for Dorothy. Do you think that TV journalism will be affected if blogging becomes as popular as TV, since it's also quite an instant way of finding out news? So do you think that TV journalism could go down in popularity than as it is now?
All the new forms of journalism are, of course, a challenge to television journalism, but I think it's up to us as television journalists to enter into these new technological ways of communicating with people. And as I say, we relaunched our website 2 weeks ago with fantastic blogs, and I think Christian Guru-Murthy is one of the most popular people on Twitter in the country. We're not afraid of them. We welcome them, because the more you can get people thinking and discussing for themselves, in the end, the more interest there will be in current affairs and news, I think.
Thank you. Yep.
Hi, Don McAndrew, MA Journalism. It kind of expands upon the blogging aspect. Would you say the increase in blogging in Web 2.0 is potentially an attempt to personify the newsreader, or is there another purpose to that? And if so, what are the benefits?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
To put it a different way, Angela, would you say blogging and Twitter and Facebook and all these different means of interacting with the audience, would you say it's potentially an attempt to put the audience and the newsreader themselves on the same level?
Kind of personal relationship thing.
I don't know. I think you'd have to ask the person who was on the receiving end of that whether or not they felt that they were in that position. I'm not sure. I think that the public as a whole will always look, in times of national importance or major national stories, to a figure of authority who will be their news reader, be it on radio or television, who will tell them the news. If you've got bloggers who are entering into some kind of personal relationship with a newsreader, that is something quite different. And presumably they're doing it because they respect that individual, because they respect their opinions and want to get that little bit closer to them. But I don't think that when it comes to actually reporting the news to the nation as a whole, because it's bound to be a one-to-one issue with them, and the blogger and the person on the receiving end, they are the only two people who are involved in that conversation. They're not necessarily involving, 12 million viewers. But if there is a moment of national importance when everyone is going to turn to their televisions, as they did when the Chilean miners were brought up, then I'm afraid that the blogger may be, if you like, someone giving a little bit of colour and something of their opinion of what is happening, but people will still turn to television, I think, don't you, Dorothy, to get the story and the major news.
I mean, I think that people want to go, say, to Jon Snow's blog because they trust Jon Snow and they know he's been all around the world and we haven't, so he can interpret some events for us. People already feel they have quite a personal relationship with people on TV. They feel they know them. I mean, even I've myself found I've greeted people I've seen on TV and then realised to my embarrassment, I don't know that person, but I feel that I know them. And, it's very interesting as well that that person, of course, must still remain duly impartial. So they're blogging, they're talking a lot, they're talking directly to viewers, and they're remaining duly impartial, and it's quite a challenge. And some people have gone a bit wrong in their blogs, actually, not, of course, on Channel 4, because, they've drifted into personal opinion.
Thank you. Anyone here? Yes, can I just take this opportunity, because I know we're coming up to a deadline, to publicise these talks. On Wednesday, October the 27th, the American intellectual who's doing a tour of England is dropping in to see us, Michael Albert. It will be at 7:30. November the 1st, John Pilger, the famous investigative journalist, is here. And tonight, I haven't forgotten, opposite us, after this session, there is a showing of a film about Afghanistan for those of you who are interested. Okay? Right.
Jenny, another second year English journalism student. Dorothy, what's been the most memorable edition of Dispatches you've worked on?
Great question. Good question.
Did you get
Yeah, it was okay.
Do you know, I don't know the answer to that because I think that each thing you do is just so utterly different. I can't compare North Korea to MPs for hire. I just think I have the most fantastic life. I get up every day and if I think something looks bad, I can investigate it. And I don't even have to do it myself. Other people go and do it. While Hetty and I sit at home eating pizza.
Okay, I'm going to finish it there. There are some disappointments tonight. I'm sorry. We have a train to dash for. What was the most memorable? But I'm sure a lot in this room will see this session as one of the most memorable we've had. A terrific debate by two of the leading, most important women in British journalism today. Let's thank them both.
Sorry, we have to rush back. I do apologise.